Well, good morning. We have been praying for you, whether we've met you or not, whether we've ever crossed paths. You've been prayed for throughout this past week and over the course of the last several months. Our team has been praying that people would come here on this day and God willing, Sundays forward, and encounter an amazing and incredible God and discover how much He deeply, deeply loves you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Brian. This is my family. Let me show you this. That's my wife, who was singing just a moment ago, and our little infant who's sitting over there in the stroller, and then the one in the blue, she calls that her Bebo costume. She's upstairs ruling the world, and so we have an amazing kids team, by the way. And if you've got children, let me just tell you this: don't worry, we got this. We're with you. I'm a parent. I got little ones. And we are very protective of your children. So just know that they are in good hands upstairs. And obviously, if there's anything that you're needed for, we'll let you know. Here's what we're going to do. We realize that today there are several of us that are in this space that are kind of checking things out. And so what I want to do is, we're not going to talk too much about who Breakthrough Church is and what we're doing. You can find out stuff on our website. You can come to one of our welcome parties in the next few weeks. There are plenty of ways for you to find out more. Instead, what I'd like to do is, over the course of the next few moments, I'm going to treat this as if maybe some of you might never walk in these doors again. What would it be that I would want us to talk about? And so what we're doing today is we're kicking off a series that we'll do over the course of the next 4 weeks. And we're calling it Slaying Giants. And we're recognizing that there are particular giants, particular barriers, things that are standing in between where you are and where God wants you to be. And we want to slay those giants. I recognize that there are people that walked in this room this morning, and you know and I know that you have been in bondage. And today that needs to end. Today you need to be broken free of that. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start by going to John chapter 8. And if you have a Bible, you can go there. If you have a phone, you can scroll there or Google it. John chapter 8. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our giant past. And one of the passages that we're going to be hitting on is this story of this woman who was caught in adultery, and she has this encounter with Jesus. I want to start this, though, by recognizing that I don't think that we all came here today to check a box and say, I came to church. I believe that there's a greater reason that we're all here. And I believe that God brought you here today so that you could encounter Him. That He is real, and He is here. He is present in our midst, and He wants to speak to you specifically about your actual situation. That He cares enough about you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 3 things. The first thing I'm going to do is present a problem. The second thing I'm going to do is we're going to open up to John chapter 8. We're going to see what the Bible has to say about that problem. And then we're going to see how the Bible gives us a clear path forward for how to move past that problem. Okay? So that's really simple agenda for our time. Okay? So here's the problem. What do you do when what you've done is true? What do you do when there's something that you've done and maybe it betrayed someone or hurt someone, and we've all got this, right? And you've been found out, and there's no saying, oh, no, it's just a misunderstanding. It's true. It actually happened. And now you have to throw up your hands and say, I don't have a clear path forward on this. Because you can rebuke a lie, But when something is actually true, what happens when it deals with more than just you? It affects more than just yourself. It affects the people that are around you, the people that you love and care about, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family members. When it's actually true, what you've done, it has a bigger domino effect. So as we talk about our giant past today, I want to recognize this one thing about the story that we're going to read in John chapter 8. You may be looking this up, and the verses that we read, you might be in a version of the Bible that doesn't even have these verses. Okay? So I need to explain why that is. The way that the Bible came about was with a lot of scrolls and early manuscripts and letters that were kind of circulating through the early kind of Christian world, and you would handwrite things and pass them, right? And this passage that we're going to be reading through is one that was in some of the manuscripts that we have of this book of John, and it wasn't in other ones. And so now we know that this event took place because we have so much evidence of it, but what we have is that there might be certain versions of Bibles that might not have this or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the verses on the screen, so that way, we don't have to get there yet, but once we do kind of walk through this, I'm going to put them there, that way you can still follow along, okay? So let's do this. Okay, starting with verse 1. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives. But early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. So just to give you an idea what Jesus is doing, he's walking from place to place. You walked back then. And as he was interacting with various people, he was impacting so many people's lives. And at this particular point in the story, he goes to this place that we would call the temple, which was much like a modern-day church for them, right? This is their religious center. And this is the place where they believed that they could kind of escape from the world. It was a place where they guarded its purity and the holiness of the temple, and you were to kind of clean up before you walked into the doors of the temple. And I realize that there might be some of us here this morning that you walked into this space feeling like that, like, what if I didn't clean up before I walked into this space? What if I've still got dirt in my past? What if there are traumas, things that I've done, things that have been done to me, situations that I've been in, and I haven't dealt with those things, and now here I am, and I feel like I need to be able to clean up or at least put on a front. And I got great news for you. The rest of us are all screwed up too. We've all got our own junk. And when you come into this space, if we were to call this a temple, this is the kind of space that you can come in with your mess. And Jesus sees you just as you are, loves you right where you are. Too much to leave you there, but he loves you right where you are. And we want to be that kind of church too. So here he is, and a crowd is gathering, right? Because they're hearing that this guy Jesus was pretty well known, right? So a crowd is gathering. He sat down. That would have been the custom. You would sit down. So in these days, we put a platform and you raise somebody up so that everybody can see them. At that time, the person went down and everybody kind of looked like this, right? This is just how they did it. So he sits down and he begins to teach them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees. So Pharisees were really religious people. That's what they were. That's a title. Okay, they were the super religious, like the super Christians, but they were Jewish, so the super Jews, right? And they brought this woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, and they put her in front of the crowd. So first of all, she's caught in the act. So a group of men does not catch a woman in the act of adultery by accident. Okay? This is not just somebody opened a door and oops, okay? They were on the hunt. They were looking for this. And we're going to try to ask in a moment, what was their motivation? Why were they doing this? But they found this woman in the act of adultery, and what they did was they drug her into the front of everyone in the temple. It would be just like them pulling somebody right through those doors, walking them up, standing this person in front of a crowd of people, right? And just imagine just for a moment for this woman how humiliating this must have been for her. How dehumanizing. And then to add to this, that the punishment for adultery, it was considered in their culture to be a crime. And so she's being dragged up in front of a crowd of people, and she thinks, today is the day that I'm going to die. This is ultimate humiliation and an ultimate risk that she's being put into. So what do you do then with a person that's experiencing shame? Because this is her, right? Fully exposed with all of her flaws. I'll tell you what you do. We have compassion on them. That's what we do. And compassion comes from two parts. Come, which means with, and passion, which means to suffer. It means that when we see somebody that's been fully exposed with all of their wounds and all of their hurts and all of their flaws and all of their, and yes, we'll say it, sins, all of the things that they've done, that they've been put out there, you know what we do? We sit down in the suffering and in the hurt, and we sit in it with them. We have compassion. But that's not what's happening here. It's not what's happening for this woman. When she needed compassion, she received humiliation. Brene Brown, who is an author, and she actually has a PhD in shame research. She wrote a number of books, but one of them, she writes this, and I just want to read it to us. If you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 ingredients to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in the petri dish and then douse it with empathy, it can't survive. So this is what happens when you choose to have compassion, when you choose to suffer with. It removes the shame for that person. So she's kind of wondering, right? What's happening here? What's going to happen to me? And there's this group of men, but there's also Jesus here. How's Jesus going to respond in this moment? Well, let's keep reading. So, teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery, and the law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? You see, here's the thing. Ashamed people shame people. These men, they had their own insecurities. They had their own flaws. They had their own stuff. And they felt threatened by the presence of this person, Jesus, who was coming and bringing redemption and restoration to people that they didn't feel deserved it. And so they're looking at Jesus and saying, no, we've got to find a way to bring you down. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring this woman and put you in an impossible situation. And we are going to shame her publicly. They manipulated the Old Testament law. I think if you grew up in the church, or if you didn't grow up in a local church, you may have had this kind of belief that the Old Testament and the New Testament were like these two different gods, right? The Old Testament was this God of judgment and condemnation, and then along comes Jesus, and it's like God suddenly changed his mind. But if you read things in their context, we realize that throughout the Old Testament, each of the steps that God took was a step towards redemption and restoration. Each one was a quantum leap forward for humanity. And the people that were following God, the Hebrew people, they were the people that were kind of God's experiment, to see how all this would play out. And in one particular passage in Leviticus 20:10, you see this play out. If a man commits adultery, by the way, is this awkward? I hope it's not awkward, okay? But if this is awkward for you, okay? Yeah, these are crazy things to read, okay? So if a man commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, both the man and the woman who have committed adultery must be put to death. Okay, whew, that feels heavy, right? That feels heavy. But what we have to realize is that in that culture, where women were considered property, and they were passed around and considered to not have any value, or at least not the value that men had. This concept to bring a death penalty on these two people in the act of adultery was an immediate threat to all of these men who used women to their own ends. And yes, the threat was to both the man and the woman, but this was something that was elevating the marginalized and the oppressed of that society and giving them an opportunity by saying, you know what, when that man takes advantage of a woman, something is going to happen. And there will be something that comes back to them, right? So this was, I realize this is hard to hear, but you also notice something, right? Because this is the verse that these guys are quoting to say that we should put this woman to death. Who's missing in the equation? The man.
Yeah.
And singled her out. And the fascinating thing was that the law was put into place to protect people, and now it's being manipulated to hurt people. So now we see their motive, right? Let's keep reading. They were trying to trap him. They're trying to trap Jesus into saying something that they could use against him. But Jesus, and this is this famous scene, he stoops down and he wrote in the dust with his finger. And we don't know what he wrote. Theologians have some ideas. She was essentially, in their minds, an object lesson. And theologians believe that when he stooped down and began to write into the sand or into the dust, a lot of theologians believe that he was beginning to write the names of the men who had brought her in front of this crowd. Now, as he's writing the names of these men, I don't think that they're quite catching on what he's at or what he's after. But he is writing. And if that's the case, then I think that we need to pay close attention. And as we do this, I think I need to make one distinction for us. There is a difference between guilt and shame. This is an important distinction to make. You see, guilt is based on your action, but shame is based on your identity. In other words, guilt says, hey, I did bad, and shame says, I am bad. Guilt is about awareness of something that you did wrong. Shame puts you in bondage to that thing that you did. So even when it's in the past, you can't get away from it. It's chasing you throughout your life. You see, guilt can be removed, but shame has to be healed over time. Guilt is about redemption. You can be redeemed. But shame, it needs restoration. In other words, when you think about the things that you've done or the things that have been done to you, the things that you didn't do and you felt like you should have, you can look back on that and say, yeah, I was guilty, right? Guilt can be a gift to us. It can be a good thing because it can expose what we did and cause us to go back to that person and say, you know what I did was wrong. Can we make things right? That's what guilt does. Right? But shame then chases you, and for long periods of time you're continuing to walk through life haunted by these things in your past. And shame has no place and should have no place over your life. Shame capitalizes on what you did, where you've been, what happened to you. And it gives you a false identity. It says things like you're not worthy, or you're a loser, or you're not enough, or you just need to try harder, or that you can't be loved, or that you're a disappointment, or you're just condemned, unredeemable. And then this is where shame will eventually take you. It'll eventually take you to a place where you believe that nobody will ever accept you if they found out. So we spend a lot of time in our lives hiding our shame and hiding the things that are going on in our hearts for fear that someone else will find out and then we'll experience rejection all over again. This is what shame does. It is wicked. And it will wreck your life. And here's where shame came from. You have to go all the way back to the first 3 pages of the Bible. where we see our first parents, Adam and Eve, have this struggle with God. And there's one particular spot I just want to zero in on. This is in Genesis 3. This is Eve, she took. And that word, took. She saw something that wasn't hers, and she reached out and grabbed it and took it for herself. She took some of the fruit, and she ate it. And then she gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it too. And at that moment, their eyes were open. Now, I want to stay there. I don't want to go to the next part of the verse yet. This is guilt. Okay? She took it, and then her eyes were opened. She is now aware that she did something that she should not have done. Right? Now, at this point, guilt without shame should draw her back to God, back to the Father, where she says, you know what, I did something wrong. My eyes are now opened. I can't believe what I just did. What do we do about this, right? But then here's what happens, the very next thing, right? Let's keep going. And suddenly, they felt shame at their nakedness. Suddenly they're aware, right? They're aware. And so they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. That is shame. Fully exposed, and the need and the impulse, the compulsion to begin to hide and try to keep other people from seeing you for who you truly are. The irony of this is that deep within the human condition, we all have this deep desire to be fully seen, fully known, fully accepted, and fully loved. But shame will cause us to hide and push people away, when we really need to expose and be willing to let people see us for who we truly are and for what's going on under the surface. You see, there are two types of people in this room. I know this for a fact. There are people in this room that are still in the first part of that. You're still living out verse 6. You're experiencing guilt, and maybe just now you're beginning to be aware of that. Make no mistake, every single one of us, we were born broken. We were born with hurt, wounds, and the word that the Bible uses for this word sin, that we don't like to talk about because it feels icky, right? Comes from this word, hamartia, which is a Greek word. And it literally, so it's actually an archery term, and it's fascinating if you look this up. Imagine an archer taking an arrow and trying to hit the target over and over and over again and never being able to hit the mark. See, hamartia, sin, means just missing the mark. The problem is when you're working with faulty instruments, if you were an archer and you took an arrow and it was broken, it doesn't matter how accurate you think you are. It doesn't matter how much you train and practice and prepare, you will never hit that target. And when it comes to living a fully redeemed, fully restored life, we're working with broken instruments. And because we're working with broken instruments, we start out at least in a position of guilt. But it's the shame that follows us. And that's the second type of person in here. You became a follower of Jesus. And you discovered that because of Jesus, you could be redeemed. And you gave your life to Him. You gave your heart to Him. You gave Him every part of you. And you realized that in that moment that your guilt was removed. And this is what happens when you give your life to Jesus. The guilt is removed. The condemnation is removed. The Bible says that you are now a new creation. That the old is gone and the new has come. You've been given a second chance. And if you're in the second category of people in here, you know that the guilt was removed. And somehow you went and took that coat of guilt and you put it back on yourself. And now it's become shame. And you're living under the bondage and the chains of shame over your life. And He's saying, you're my child, you're my son, you're my daughter. He's saying, I love you, I care about you, I accept you. And you're saying, no, you don't know what I did. You don't understand. You don't get it. You don't understand what's going on in my past. You don't understand. And God's saying, yes, I do. And somehow, the deeper the shame goes, the more we will fight God. And it's like we're looking at him and calling him a liar. No, you can't love me. You can't accept me. You can't care about me. Don't you know who I am and what I've done? This is what shame does. So there are two types of people in this room. There are those of us that we haven't had the guilt removed yet because we haven't even begun the journey with Jesus. And maybe today that needs to change for you. You need to start the journey with Jesus and have the guilt removed. But then there's others of us in here that we've had the guilt removed, and now suddenly we've found our way back into shame. Whichever one you are, I can't answer that. That's for you and God. But what I know is that God has a path for you that he wants you on. And I want that for you too. Let's keep reading. So these guys, they kept demanding an answer. Because Jesus isn't really answering, right? He's just writing in the dirt. They're like, come on, Jesus. This woman, she needs to be killed. Let's do this. So they demand an answer, and so he stood up again, and he said, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. And then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. And this is another place where a lot of theologians believe that at this point, he was writing out their sins next to their names. So he had been writing out their names, and now he's writing out their sins. We don't know that that's true. That's conjecture, right? But it is one of the predominant theories that people have. And the reason why people believe that that's probably what was going on is what happened next. Watch this. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest. Why do you think that is? Because the older you are, the more junk you got. Right? And they're slipping away until, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. So here she is. She has been fully exposed and fully accused. And now she sits here with the one person in the room that sees her as she truly is and loves her just as she is. You see, vengeance is easier than vulnerability. And they didn't quite get that. They wanted vengeance. The right move for any one of these men at that point would have been to say, okay, it's me. And to become vulnerable. And to begin sharing about their own sin and their own brokenness and their own hurt and their own trauma and their own shame. But they slipped away. They couldn't take the idea of risking being found out. So they left. It's easier to expose other people's flaws than it is to expose our own. You see, when we are ashamed, we do one of two things. We either pretend or we perform. Some of us pretend. We medicate, we hide, we lie, we blame. Anything to deflect this exposure that we don't want to happen. Or we perform, right? We try to excel. We try to argue so that the other person knows that they're wrong and we're right. Or we begin to tear other people down. This is a performance technique. If I can't get to the top, I'll tear you down, right? This is what we do. And then, here's what happens next. Jesus stood up again, and he said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" I love this. "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." You see, you need to know three things. based on this last interaction. Number one is, Jesus is not surprised by your past. John 3:17, a handful of verses before this, says, God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. He knows your past, and he's not surprised by it. Number two, Jesus does not condemn you. Romans 8:1 says, so now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. No condemnation. And Jesus does not compromise. Notice at the end there, right? What does he say? Go and sin no more, right? He doesn't just say, it's okay, you're fine as you are. No, he loves her too much to leave her in that state. John 1:14, we've seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, Jesus is full of grace and truth. He both forgives and he helps us become our full, best version of ourselves. There's this story that I want to tell you. It's a known story. Some of you may have heard it. And Matt Chandler tells this story about when he was in college, and he was a part of this college ministry in Texas. And there was a young woman. She was a mid-20s. She'd had a couple kids, but she'd been in a bad relationship and had pulled out of that relationship. And so Matt and a handful of his friends had started to kind of care for her and just help her get back on her feet and everything. And she had really been burned by Christianity before, and she had said, I really don't want much of this whole Jesus thing. But on one particular occasion, they had a friend of theirs that was going to play drums at a church, and he said, he's playing drums, why don't you join with me, right? And they come to this church thing, and she thinks it's a concert, but he knows better. And so they get there and they sit down, and over the course of the next several moments, they realize that they get this guest speaker in that day. And the guest speaker says, today I want to talk to you about sex. And immediately Matt is thinking, oh God, this is the worst time to bring my friend, right? And so the guy says, hey, I want to talk about sex. And then the guy takes this rose, right? And he holds up this rose and he says, look at how beautiful this rose is. And then he looks over, finds somebody in the front row, and he hands them the rose and he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to touch it. I want you to feel it. I want you to smell it. I want you to, and then I want you to pass it around to the other people around you. And over the course of the next 30 minutes, Matt is sitting here next to his friend awkwardly as this person is telling people this really wretched, shameful, speech about what sex does to people and how it shames you and how, you could be used and nobody wants you if you're this kind of thing, right? It was tragic and terrible and it should never have happened. And at the end of his message, he says, hey, who's got that rose? Does somebody have that rose out there, right? And he finds whoever has it, and the person passes it up, and he holds it up, and it's, tattered and worn, and petals are broken off, and he says, yeah, who would ever want this, right? And holds it up. I mean, the guy's not even teaching the basics of our faith. And Matt's sitting here, and it's everything in him that he wanted to just scream out, Jesus died. He died for the rose. And maybe that's you. Maybe you are a person, or you look back on your past and you think, you don't get it. I've been passed around. You don't understand the things that I've done. It's one after another, after another, after another. I am tattered. I am torn. I am used. I am worthless. I am nothing. Nobody would ever want me. And you want to know what? He does. Jesus wants you. He loves you so deeply. And when you think, there's nobody that would ever want me, and there's nobody that would ever love me, I want you to know that He would. He wants you. He wants to sit with you. He wants to have compassion on you. He wants to suffer with you and sit in your hurt and brokenness. And when He went to the cross, it was the ultimate display of saying, I will step into the brokenness and the hurt and the pain, and I will remove it. And I will remove the guilt, and I'm going to give you a shot at removing the shame too. You don't have to live in bondage to that. You don't have to live under that control. The chains can be broken. Now, under your chairs, there's a rock. I want everybody to reach down, grab it. If you have a hard time reaching down, maybe your neighbor can help you. But grab this rock, and I want you to hold it. And our worship leaders are going to come up, and we're going to close with this. This is what I want you to do. I want you to take a look at this rock, and I want you to look at it for a moment. And on this rock, I want you to imagine for a moment all of the things that you have done, the things that have been done to you, and the things that you haven't done that you wish that you had, and the things that now you think to yourself, this is my shame. Okay? I want you to hold that in your hand. I'm going to give you a moment, and over the next 4 or 5 minutes, Sarah is going to sing over us a song. And this song is kind of speaking some truth over us. And as we do this, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what you have sitting there. And I want to make a challenge. At some point during this song, if you are ready to give up, it depends on which of these categories you're in, right? For some of you, you look on this rock and you say, I've never taken this to Jesus. None of this has ever been taken to Jesus. I've never even started the journey. And so maybe this is starting the journey for you. For others of you, this is a shame issue, not just a guilt issue. And you've been freed, but you've been living under the curse anyway. And you need to bring it back to Jesus. And we've got a table on either side of the room with a cross. And my challenge to you is that at any point in this, during the next 5 minutes, as you feel ready and you feel led, I want you to take that rock, that stone. I want you to recognize for a moment that Jesus is sitting with you when you are fully exposed, all your flaws, when others want to hurt you, and He removes the stone. He took away the curse. And your challenge is to take that. I think there's something about doing something physical. Stand up. Go to one of these and take it to the cross and leave it there. And do not walk out of this room with that shame. You leave it there at the cross. And you let the power of God do for you what you could never have done for yourself.